Nothing spreads like fear. That was the tagline for Contagion, a 2011 disaster thriller film directed by Steven Soderbergh and written by Scott Z. Burns. It featured an all-star cast that included the likes of Matt Damon, Lawrence Fishburne, and Kate Winslet, among others. When Contagion was initially released, it did pretty okay for itself, garnering generally favorable reviews from critics and audience members alike, and landing at rank 43 in terms of domestic box office numbers for 2011. Little did anyone know this film would hit its peak in popularity, at least in terms of being searched on Google, 9 years after its release, in March of 2020. On December 31st, 2019, the World Health Organization received a report of viral pneumonia cases in the Chinese city of Wuhan. 3 months later, on March 11th, 2020, the WHO officially declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. By April 2020, society and countries across the world was being put on lockdown in an attempt to reduce transmission and save the healthcare system from being completely overwhelmed. Non-essential travel was restricted, events were canceled, school and work went remote. Except, of course, if you were an essential worker. Amidst all the chaos, fear, and uncertainty, people looked to movies like Contagion for answers. And to give you a sense of how many people gravitated to this movie, according to piracy analytics company Muso, the average daily visits for Contagion increased by 5,609% in January 2020 compared to December 2019. On IMDb, you can find reviews published in early 2020 with titles like, "We're only now getting to terms with how realistic this portrayal was," and "When entertainment mirrors reality." But that was from the start of the pandemic. Now that we're 4 years out, with more information and hindsight on our side, I thought it would be fun to have a little retrospective by taking a look at how well Contagion predicted the future. Okay, no. Let's start with a movie recap. So the story skips around several perspectives throughout the film so as to provide an all-encompassing view of the pandemic as it unfolds. To make things a little easier to understand, here is a character web I made for reference. Day 2. So the movie opens with Beth, who is at a layover in Chicago after returning from a business trip in Hong Kong. As she speaks with someone on the phone, we can see that she's coughing and visibly unwell. As Beth reunites with her family in Minneapolis, we see clips of several other people traveling back to their homes in London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong, where they all fall ill and pass away. One of these incidents gets captured on video and catches the attention of one Alan Crumwitty, an independent journalist, conspiracy theorist, and blogger. Back in Minneapolis, Beth's condition has gotten worse. In the middle of a conversation with her husband Mitch, she falls to the floor and starts having a seizure. Mitch goes with Beth to the hospital where, despite the doctor's best efforts, she too passes away. As if the day wasn't already horrible enough, when Mitch returns home, he finds out that his stepson Clark has also passed away after having come home from school earlier due to illness. Back at the hospital, the doctors conduct an autopsy on Beth's body in an attempt to identify the cause of death, and wow, if you're squeamish about gore, maybe skip this scene. Anyways, what they discover is so shocking that they immediately call it in. Day 6. The virus continues to spread and has now been detected by the National Public Health Authority, the CDC. Here we meet Dr. Ellis Cheever, the director, I think. They don't really specify. Anyways, he sends Dr. Aaron Mears, a determined and competent Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer, to Minneapolis to address the situation. Mears arrives in Minneapolis and meets with the local health department. One of the local health officials is aggressively against making a public announcement and inducing panic in the public so early on, especially when, quote,
"It's the biggest shopping weekend of the year."
In a biosafety level 4 laboratory at the CDC, we meet Dr. Ali Hextall. Upon examining the samples sent in from Minnesota, the virus is found to have novel characteristics. Back in Minnesota, Mears is in the midst of contact tracing, interviewing employees at Beth's company to identify who else might have been infected. She also interviews Mitch, and this is where it is revealed to him that right before she died, Beth had cheated on him with an ex during her layover, consequently causing the outbreak in Chicago. Like, nobody is having a good time, but he is definitely not having a good time. Anyways, the situation is now serious enough that the CDC holds a press conference. In response to a reporter's question regarding a past incident where the CDC had a perceived overreaction to H1N1, Shiva replies,
"I'd rather the news story be that we overreacted and that many people lost their lives because we didn't do enough."
It's a good answer. Just keep that in mind. Now the International Public Health Authority is involved. Here we meet Dr. Lenora Orantes, an epidemiologist of the World Health Organization. She has been tasked with identifying the origin of the virus and flies out to Hong Kong to retrace Beth's steps. Day 12. Back in the US, there's been a breakthrough. The virus, named MEV1, has been successfully grown in a lab setting. This is the first step in developing a vaccine. Back at the hospital, Mitch is confirmed to be immune to the virus. As he and Jory leave, we see a crowded and chaotic lobby as panic is setting in amongst the general public. Meanwhile, after setting up a treatment center in an athletic facility, Mears falls sick. And over on the other side of the world, Orantes is kidnapped by Sun Peng for leverage in order to get his village, which has been heavily impacted by the virus, priority access to the vaccines when they are available. So the situation is quite dire. Not for Alan though, who swoops in and live streams supposedly curing himself of MEV1 homeopathically with forsythia. Day 18. Now we're at the climax of the film. There is now mass disorder and unrest, violence, protests, looting. People are lining up in droves for forsythia at the pharmacy. Public places are deserted, rations are being handed out by the government in quarantined areas, and Mears has passed away. The virus has gotten worse too. It's mutated to be even more infectious. The mortality rate is reported to be 25 to 30%, with 1 in 12 people on Earth projected to become infected without a vaccine. Thankfully, there's been huge progress made on the vaccine development front. Vaccine number 57 has shown promising results in the test monkeys. In order to speed up the process so less people would have to die in the interim, Dr. Ali Hextall injects herself with the vaccine. She then exposes herself to her sick father, and the next thing we see is that mass production for the vaccine is a go. Day 131. A limited number of vaccines are now ready to be distributed. Sun Peng and Orantes make the trade with the WHO official for the vaccines, except they're revealed to be placebos because the Chinese do not negotiate with kidnappers, causing Orantes to rush back to inform the village because, she cares. Alan is arrested for conspiracy and securities fraud, but of course he is bailed out by his fans. Vaccinated people are marked by a wristband with a barcode that must be scanned in order to enter public venues. Mitch throws Jory and her now vaccinated boyfriend Andrew a little prom night in their home after rightfully keeping them away from each other for months. The film ends with revealing what happened on day 1. Apparently, when the bulldozing crew from Beth's company was clearing trees, they disturbed a group of bats that ended up relocating to a pig farm. One of the bats dropped an infected piece of banana, which was consumed by a pig, which was then slaughtered by a chef at the Macau casino who, without washing his hands, then shook hands with Beth, making her the index case. Many of the plot points in Contagion bear an eerie resemblance to the details of the real-life COVID-19 pandemic. This is not super surprising though, considering the fact that it was the goal of screenwriter Scott Z. Burns to depict a realistic pandemic scenario, which he achieved through consultations with experts and looking to pandemics of the past. So what did the film predict correctly? Here is a non-comprehensive list. Origin of the virus. In the movie, the MEV1 virus was shown to have originated from a spillover event involving a wild bat and a farm in Macau. In real life, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, was found to have been descended from wild bats. The precise details of the spillover event are murky, but its initial epicenter was a seafood wholesale market in Wuhan, China. Infectiousness. In the movie, the MEV1 virus was initially identified to have a basic reproduction number of 2. This shot up to 4 when the virus mutated. In real life, the WHO initially estimated the basic reproduction number of SARS-CoV-2 as between 1.4 and 2.4. Since then, we have had several variants spring up. Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and Omicron were the first 5. According to a 2022 study, the Omicron variant has a basic reproduction number of 9.5 and a range from 5.5 to 24. And that was in 2022. Since then, the virus has had plenty of opportunities to mutate, and the list of variants has only grown. Misinformation regarding cures. So in the movie, the conspiracy theorist Alan claims that forsythia is a cure for the MEV1 virus. News of this spreads and leads to panic buying and forsythia shortages. It was later revealed that this was a lie that had net him a cool $4.5 million. In real life, well, you could take your pick of rumored cures and pandemic profiteers. There was ivermectin, an anti-parasitic drug which was flying off the shelves so quickly, shop owners were demanding to see picture proof of people's horses. There was hydroxychloroquine sulfate and chloroquine phosphate, which were touted as an effective treatment by Donald Trump, former president of the United States and, as of writing, currently in the running again.
The only person at this stage is a convicted felon is the man I'm looking at right now.
And of course, Sandy Hook denier Alex Jones promoted his products, many of which contain colloidal silver, as a cure for COVID-19. Back to normal. By the end of the movie, when people started to get vaccinated, we saw a little of a return to normal. Mitch was able to go buy a prom dress for Jory, and in order to be let into the mall, he had to have his little vaccination wristband scanned beforehand. This is quite similar to real life. When air travel and public venues started reopening, many would require proof of vaccination before allowing for entrance. Not anymore though. Okay, so I would say, all in all, Contagion got a lot of things right. Unfortunately, we do not live in a movie, even if that movie is a disaster thriller. The way the film ends implies that with the vaccine, the pandemic is over. Things can now go back to how they were before. And that is also the narrative that is prevalent today. In real life, the pandemic is over. We have all suffered, some much more than others, but now we can vax and relax. Right? Well, This is perhaps the most damning data visualization of what's happened. After the big bump in 2020 to 2021, excess deaths have still not come down to pre-2020 times. Just because the government has decided to no longer track COVID cases does not mean that people aren't still getting infected and suffering as a result. This virus is not a baby with no object permanence. In fact, I would say in this situation, we are the coughing baby while the virus is the hydrogen bomb. What is going on? Well, let's go over what the movie got wrong. The facade for this bit is wearing a little thin, but I am committed to seeing this through. Transmission. In the movie, MEV1 is spread by respiratory droplets and fomites. In real life, SARS-CoV-2 can also spread through respiratory droplets. Droplet transmission was primarily what was communicated early on in the pandemic, which led to things like plexiglass walls being installed at service worker stations. Unfortunately, we now know that this virus is also airborne, meaning it moves through the air like smoke and it can linger. If you've ever been in a room after someone's just been smoking there, well, you can imagine that the potential infectious distance of SARS-CoV-2 is much greater than 6 feet. Vaccination and immunity. Okay, in the movie, the TV report on the vaccine includes this line.
The WHO estimates that it could take nearly a year to manufacture and distribute the necessary amount of the vaccine to stop the spread of the virus.
This implies that the vaccine would stop people from becoming infected with the virus and thus prevent them from infecting other people. As of writing, none of the vaccines for SARS-CoV-2 totally stop you from becoming infected. They may reduce your chances of becoming infected, but not for long. A systematic review of 40 studies found that the vaccine's effectiveness against the Omicron variant dropped off significantly within 6 months. Therefore, even if you are fully vaccinated and keep up to date with all of your boosters, which, you should do, you can still become infected. You might not even know if you've been infected because asymptomatic cases are estimated to account for around 45% of cases. And just to be clear, if you are asymptomatic, you can still infect other people. And just because you can't feel it doesn't mean that the virus isn't doing any damage. Illness outcomes. In the movie, there's a part where the doctor informing Mitch of Beth's passing says,
Some people get a disease and live, some get sicker and die.
And that's what we're shown in the film. To be honest, mostly we just see people getting the virus and then dying. I don't think we saw anybody actually recover from it. And in real life, there's a secret third option we don't like to think about, which is some people get the disease and live with permanent damage and new or worsened medical conditions. And by some, I mean many people, most people, because even if you get quote-unquote mild COVID symptoms, there's nothing mild about what the virus is doing. Every infection does damage to the body and puts you at greater risk for long COVID. And what might this long COVID look like? Well, have you noticed that you or the people around you have been getting sick a lot more often than they used to? Not just with COVID, but with stuff like the flu, RSV, norovirus, strep throat. Well, COVID has been linked to long-term immune system damage. And what's this about a surge of cancers in young people? Well, there have been several studies which have suggested that cancer could be a potential long-term complication of the virus. And heart issues, like a racing heartbeat or even a surge in heart attacks. Research has shown that COVID-19 infections can cause significant cardiovascular damage, resulting in things like heart attacks and strokes. I could go on for a long time because, honestly, the list is staggering. But just to quickly drive home the point, here are 2 infographics that list the many ways that long COVID can present in adults and in children. Who is susceptible? So in the movie, MEV1 was shown to infect everyone, children, adults, and the elderly. No one was safe from getting infected, except Mitch. I guess. Good for Mitch. This is actually true in the case of SARS-CoV-2 as well. This section is only here because it doesn't really fit in with the first half of this video, so we're just gonna have to accept that. In real life, despite the perception that only the elderly and immunocompromised are at serious risk when it comes to COVID-19, the truth is nobody is immune to the havoc that this virus can wreak on the body. People who have been emblematic of good health, like elite athletes, have had their present and futures completely reshaped by long COVID. And okay, let's say in an alternate reality, it were true that COVID only seriously impacts the elderly and the immunocompromised. Does that make it somehow okay to treat this virus lightly? To exclude those people from public life? To make it harder for them to access medical care? It's not okay. And as writer and disability advocate Imani Barbaran put it, you may now become who you thought was disposable. That was a lot. Here are some final thoughts before we wrap it up. Contagion is a movie that sought to realistically portray the horrors of a global pandemic in which no one was safe, and its creators did their due diligence. However, I wonder if any filmmaker would have been able to imagine the kind of situation we're in now, a situation where the disaster continues to unfold, but in enforced silence. A situation where government and health authorities have dropped all rational precautionary measures for the sake of business as usual. Well, I guess if you're up to date on recent history, it's not that hard to imagine. But is this the kind of sickness something that can be accepted as normal? Politicians and the rich don't seem to want that for themselves. So what can you do? One of the most important things you can do to stop playing COVID roulette is to wear a respirator mask, one that fits well to your face without leaving any gaps because, like we've covered, this virus travels through the air like smoke. Respirator masks, like N95s, elastomeric masks, are essentially air filters you attach to your face that filters out harmful particles, including the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the H5N1 virus, hypothetically. Just to be clear, not all masks are respirators. Surgical and cloth masks, for example, are not respirators, and they are simply not as effective for this use case. By masking, you'll be protecting yourself and others around you, the people you live with, your friends, your coworkers, strangers, as well as people who are especially vulnerable and may not even have the option of wearing a mask themselves. You will also be setting a precedent for what should be normal. A big part in the relaxation of masking protocol is that when you start seeing how everyone else is no longer bothering with it, the pressure to conform is immense. It's hard not to think, well, if nobody else sees a need to do this thing anymore, why should I? If you'd like to see a whole bunch of people who are still masking, try searching up the y'all masking hashtag on Twitter. There are other things you should do beyond masking. Things like testing yourself for infection, quarantining when you are sick, improving ventilation by opening windows, or investing in air purifiers. But if you take away one thing from this video, let it be that you should wear a mask. I will be linking to some fantastic videos and resources below that explores this topic in much greater detail than I have. Please check them out. So, to close, Contagion, good movie. Pandemic, not over. What can you do? Mask up. If you've made it to the end of the video, thank you very much for watching. If I missed anything or got anything wrong, please comment and let me know.
Hi, Violet Affleck, Los Angeles resident, first-time voter, I'm 18. I contracted a post-viral condition in 2019. I'm okay now, but I saw firsthand that medicine does not always have answers to the consequences of even minor viruses. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown that into sharper relief. 1 in 10 infections leads to long COVID, which is a devastating neurological cardiovascular illness that can take away people's ability to work, move, see, and even think, stands to exacerbate our homelessness crisis, as well as the suffering of many people in our city. It hits communities of color, disabled people, elderly people, trans people, women, and anyone in a public-facing essential job the hardest. To confront the long COVID crisis, I demand mask availability, air filtration, and far UVC light in government facilities, including jails and detention centers, and mask mandates in county medical facilities. We must expand the availability of high-quality free tests and treatment, and most importantly, the county must oppose mask bans for any reason. They do not keep us safer. They make vulnerable members of our community less safe and make everyone less able to participate in Los Angeles together. Thank you.